excited that we have Russell McLaughlin, Debbie Irwin, and James Archer joining us for this talk, Cross-Pollination in Creative Circles. Each of our presenters has founded and owns a media company specializing in either sound or visuals. You can't haphazardly work on these elements separately and expect them to flow together seamlessly. Each creative owner has his or her own strengths, such as composing, voiceover, or animation. These elements rely on each other to harmonize in the final execution. Our presenters hope to share with you some case studies of these joint creative projects and teach you how to expand what you have to offer by reaching out to other creatives in your field or adjacent fields to form these symbiotic creative relationships. Please welcome Russell, Debbie, and James.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. I think it's obvious why I have to. The elephant in the room is that James is not here. Contrary to what's written in print, don't believe everything that you read. He wanted to be here very, very much, but in fact had a work commitment that took him to California. However, however, you will be hearing from him throughout the next hour because we had lots of conversations with him, and he's going to be here. Our intention for today is to play and to have some fun with you guys. We're going to watch some clips, listen to some clips. We're going to talk about music. Hopefully, some of you will participate and read some copy, and just sort of explore what this is all about and have a good time while we're doing it. Just a little bit of background, a little bit more specific about myself. I am from Chicago, went to Brown, then went to New York City, dare I say, almost 40 years ago to pursue my dream of being a stage actress. That lasted for a couple of years, and then I was ready for a real job, so I went to the Guggenheim Museum. That was great until I realized that I needed a real job that paid money. So after a few years, I went to Wall Street and I became a stockbroker. I had a successful career there. Then I left for Sesame Street when I started making babies, and raised a family. My 3 children are now in their mid to late 20s. And it was about 16 years ago that I discovered the world of voiceover. I've been a full-time VO pro since then. I like to say that I'm living the dream that I went to New York for. I just didn't know that it was going to look like this. And as a postscript, in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of on-camera work. Some people have asked me about the accents that I do. If you heard my talk last year, I opened it in a British accent. Most recently working on film about Ayn Rand, a Russian philosopher. His short film now is going into festivals around the country, so maybe you'll see it. And with that, my buddy and co-presenter, Russ McLaughlin.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm Russell McLaughlin from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a composer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, producer, friend, colleague, mentor, and guitar student, James Archer, introduced me to the world of the AMI, artistic development and digital media and stuff like that, which I didn't even know was a thing a couple years ago. My first meeting was last year in Boston, which was awesome. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston, so it was like a homecoming as well as an introduction to this world. And then I got to meet Debbie, and the 3 of us worked on several projects together, and here we are.
Here we are. So we don't need to tell you that the job in the world of medical animation is constantly evolving, has been since the time of Da Vinci, Broidel, and Jones. Let's hear from James. Let's hear him describe his journey. it used to be that everything that you dealt with was all of the ologies and art. Now it's so much more than that. It's marketing, it's UI/UX, it's you know, lighting, it's camera shots, it's VR, it's AR, it's all of these things pushing the boundaries of what's possible, because indeed right now, as animators, you're filmmakers.
You know, to that end, everybody in here that's doing animation is essentially a Spielberg of sorts. You know, and it's all of our collective jobs to take all of the assets, the voice, the sound, the visual, and make sure that we have a cohesive unit that elicits an emotional response. Because in this business, emotion is everything. You know, the sound and the visuals combine to create motion, and motion creates that emotion.
When you look at campaigns, you know, pick your favorite medical or health issue. You look at campaigns that inform people of healthy living, and you find that oftentimes, you know, people don't follow good advice, and you have to scratch your head and wonder, well, why is that? The information's there, the research is there, but for whatever reason, people don't follow the sound advice. And so maybe it's not a matter of having the right information. Maybe they just don't feel it. And so how can you evoke some sort of emotional response to help motivate your audience to a particular behavior or action? And so I think any successful campaign, be it, you know, like an anti-smoking campaign, you know, if you can make people feel the difference, why do I need to do this? As opposed to just hitting them with the facts or the statistics, then maybe you may generate the response you're looking for and have a successful experience.
A lot of great points. James touched on a lot of like marketing and advertising implications. And the strongest segment of marketing or advertising is sound. And sound hits us in a way that text and visuals don't. You know, it's innate. It goes back to lullabies, you know, from when we were kids, you know, and engaging the emotional senses. We keep talking about like sense-bound imageries and emotional feels, you know, and I always think back to like some, maybe I'm showing my age, but a few years ago, Aaron Neville, the late, well, I guess he's still around, but singing the touch, the feel of cotton, and of course the best part of waking up is, yes! So, but with these commercials from just a few years back, it's essentially 30-second Hallmark movies. It's a 30-second like mini drama with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a situation that like draws us in and it hits us right in the feels, as they say. And you know, it's just like with jingles, ba ba bum bum bum. You know, everyone knows that. NBC. All these things trigger these emotional responses that get ingrained in us and stick in our bones. You know, and James mentioned like the smoking ads and stuff like that. We can have a 30-second segment where we show pie charts and graphs and all these statistics and all the reasons that you shouldn't smoke and all these things. But if you think back to like the anti-smoking ads from a couple years ago, the two that have stuck with me the hardest are, there was one where these people are dragging like body bags. There's like 10,000 body bags lying in the street in New York City. I don't know if anybody ever saw that. And then we were thinking about the one, the sizzling fried egg in a pan. This is your brain on drugs, and like that, the gnarly like super scary music in the background drives the point home. I mean, it's been around forever. And
I mean, imagine if it was just the pan with the eggs frying. You'd think maybe it was a commercial for IHOP, you know? But it's only when you hear the sound, you hear the VO, and you hear that, you know, that those sound effects.
It really dictates, yeah,
right.
It dictates that narrative.
And the NBC bit is also a bit of audio branding, right?
Sure,
You know,
absolutely.
which is, we're not the only ones talking about this. Just this week, the New York Times, and it's a little bit cut off, ran an article about health facts not being enough. They say dropping knowledge from on high, which is still the modus operandi for most scientists, doesn't work. Bombarding people with more information about studies isn't helping. How the information contained in them is disseminated and discussed may be much more important. So our goal today is to talk about music and voice and to talk about scoring and narrations. These are creative professions that you may be a little bit less familiar with. And we hope to educate you a little bit and inspire you a little bit and help you to develop your ears a little bit so that you can discern the difference between good and great, and so that you can have a voice in the creative projects that you're helping to make. Why? Tell us why, Russell.
Well, everybody knows, well, at least anybody that works in animation knows, great music, great voiceover elevates your visuals like text alone with the visual just can't. And as you develop your ear, you'll better understand the way all of the elements combine to dramatically improve your project as a whole. And it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. And it's not about just having music and just having sound, it's about having sound that really taps in to the emotions, into your psyche to leave a lasting impression, to better deliver your instructional methods or your sales, whatever it is that you're trying to say. When it's packaged all together, it hits home a lot harder.
Right. So, the big, perhaps rhetorical question in the room is, are visuals and captions alone enough to achieve those goals, your sales, your marketing, your instructional goals? If not, how do you deliver a well-designed experience? Once you're involved, you want the project to be the best that it possibly can be. It's not enough to simply pull a visual, simply pull some music, simply get Jane down the hall to record the text, and then expect it to come together and to be a powerful, package. It's just disjointed and a bit discordant at that point. Each element of the animation should be handcrafted to complement every other element. Let's hear what James has to say about that. Right, so what we're saying actually is to bring your talent and add contributions. We're not talking about upselling, we're talking about upserving, becoming a pro 2.0, bringing more to the table. And it's not that necessarily you have to have that expertise, but that you understand that bringing other people who do have that expertise is going to make a difference.
So the next slide is one of my favorites. It's mostly an excuse to showcase this amazing clip art from Windows 95. But I want to talk a little bit about canned music. And a lot of you guys in this room, I'm sure, have gone to whatever.com to source license-free music. And that's essentially the visual equivalent of utilizing clip art in your illustrations. And I'm assuming that all of you want to have lengthy careers, and by doing so was probably not healthy to do such. But, a thing about, first off, several people have approached me or asked me about those same kinds of things. They're like, I spend all this time digging through whatever.com to try to find this music to support these visuals that I've spent months cultivating. What can you say about that? And I said, look, use music that can actually line up and try to help you reinforce your themes and all that sort of stuff. The other thing about clip art, or musical clip art, the source music, is that there's a good chance that your competitors, whoever they might be, are using the same sounds. They're finding the same sounds as you. And when the gentleman, I can't think of his name at the moment, but the paleontologist, when he was playing the dinosaur movie, the music in the background, the girl I was sitting next to, she freaked out, and I was like, whoa, what happened? She goes, that's the music I used in my senior portfolio. And I was like, there you go. So we've prepared a listening exercise. We have a visual with 3 different sound samples, and we're going to explore how poor quality and mismatched content can disrupt the delivery of your information.
Yeah, this is 30 seconds.
The B-cell receptor signaling pathway is essential for the activation, proliferation, and survival of B cells. Bruton's tyrosine kinase, or BTK, has been shown to play a key role in the B-cell receptor signaling pathway, both in normal and malignant cells.
Okay, what do you think?
Comments?
All right, besides you said wow. Was that a wow good? Why not?
It's really distracting. Like dance music.
Uh-huh. What did I hear somebody say?
The voiceover music balance was off.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah.
Also, like a lot of like clipping in the voiceover.
Uh-huh.
For sure.
I think the voice was too loud compared to like everything else.
Uh-huh.
The music, the visuals are very subtle, but the music and voice is very loud.
Right.
Big time.
Right.
And-
And even if you, yes, go ahead.
Not even that they were loud, like the music was so distracting. Like, I don't even actually remember what he said. I just heard BTK, that's all I remember.
For sure.
So like, yeah.
And his voice was too earnest.
Too earnest?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Expound on that.
He was like a used car salesman.
Uh-huh.
And to that, and because that was my next question, is when you hear his voice, did you hear what he was saying or how he said it? You know, and you guys kind of already answered that question. Is that at that point, the words get lost in the mix.
Right,
You know,
right.
whether it's distraction from the
Yeah.
music, distraction from, you know, the timbre, the delivery of the words, mispronunciation. Mispronunciation. Case in point.
Exhibit A.
Exhibit A. I'll be here all weekend, guys. No, but yeah. So number two.
Yeah, number two.
The B-cell receptor signaling pathway is essential for the activation, proliferation, and survival of B cells. Bruton tyrosine kinase, or BTK, has been shown to play a key role in the B-cell receptor signaling pathway, both in normal and malignant cells. Tight regulation of BTK is thought to be essential for normal B-cell function.
Okay, comments?
Comments about number two.
Yes?
Talk too fast.
Basically.
Uh-huh. Yeah, anything else?
Super excited.
Uh-huh.
Is that like weird?
Weird inflections, absolutely, yeah. Anybody else?
Very lousy mix.
A lousy mix, yeah.
The music was not right again.
Right, right.
I was expecting something to explode.
To my ear, she sounds like she's a horse at the gate and bell went off and she's like, "Brrrr," right, you know, can't wait to get to the end of it. And the inflections, as you were saying, you know, the up and down, I mean, you want range in a voice, but you don't want it to be, you know, inappropriate range. You know, it sounds like she's reading a script and that she can't wait to get to the end of it. You know?
Well, but also you have situations where people place the wrong emphasis on different syllables than they're supposed to. And both of these people, by the way, you guys are professional voiceover artists. So or they
say.
fancy themselves
Right.
professional voiceover
Right.
artists. But yeah, different inflections, stuff like that. You hear that in line two, and you think about it for just even a couple of seconds. By the time you're done thinking about what she mispronounced on line two, you're on line six, and you've missed maybe the most important part of the entire segment.
Right.
You know, and so that's why these things, if not done appropriately, and by the way, the music is absurd. I mean, we all can agree that it's not right, but it's obviously a pretty poignant look on how those two things not lining up can be a detriment to your project.
So actually, this was a project that I worked on with James a number of years ago for AstraZeneca, acalabrutinib, a breakthrough therapy for the treatment of patients with mantle cell lymphoma. So it does have music in it.
I was just going to say,
Before we
so
play it,
you heard me
so
talk about my feelings on utilizing canned music. There are going to be times when you have to do what you have to do, for whether it's budgetary or whatever, you're going to be forced to have to utilize canned music. And in this particular example, and it just in general, having a professional sound designer or artist who can take a piece of music who on its own is all right. Because I'm sure you guys, as you're scanning these sound libraries, you hear something, you're like, this is pretty good, this sounds okay, whatever. But it's impossible to have something that's not customized to your visuals line up and fit exactly to reinforce all your themes and everything. But a professional sound artist can use sound design and other techniques to at least make it passable.
The B-cell receptor signaling pathway is essential for the activation, proliferation, and survival of B cells. Bruton tyrosine kinase, or BTK, has been shown to play a key role in the B-cell receptor signaling pathway, both in normal and malignant cells. Tight regulation of BTK is thought to be essential for normal B-cell function. Upon B-cell receptor activation, BTK initiates a downstream signaling cascade that ultimately leads to normal B-cell survival and proliferation.
I could ask you what you think about that, although maybe I should close my ears. In my opinion, there's a marriage here of all of the components. No one sticks out. It's not about being center stage, either as the voice or the music or the visuals. They all really want to to be synchronized together in a way so that you're not focused on any one of them. You're focused on the story. Let's hear what James has to say, because he talks about this.
In regards to the Akela project, it was a bit unusual. I mean, we did up front inform the client of the need for a score, the need for professional voice talent, and I think they understood that well. But for other reasons, they decided to go with a piece of stock music. And frankly, the music, it sounded nice. It was professionally crafted music, but not necessarily crafted for our project. And so with the help of a professional musician, we were able to customize that music and add elements of sound design, which I think made it all seem very seamless. It didn't feel like stock at the end of the day. So, I understand every project has its own budget, and you may find that your project can't really assume the cost of a professional to come in and score it. But there's always room for those professionals regardless of the role. So if they're going to score the music, that would be great. If they're there to help you marry the music, the existing stock music, to the piece, even better. Because at that point, you have a professional who's overseeing the project and can make sure that the sound is to a certain grade or level.
So just to give you a little bit of insight into what a voiceover professional does, in the beginning, a lot of what we do is the same as what you do, right, with your clients. What's the mission? What's the project all about? What's the goal? What's the message? What are we trying to communicate? What's the feeling that we want to engender in our audience? It's important to know about the pacing. Is this going to be an up-tempo kind of delivery? Who are we talking to? If we're talking to people for whom English is a second language, then the pace has to be slower. If we're talking to the elderly or children, then too it has to be a little bit slower. We have to be cognizant of that. What's the tone? What's the feeling? Is there a connection to the words? Does the voice artist really feel those words, and do they sound like they're coming out of them genuinely, authentically? Or do they sound like they're just reading? Clarifying thought chunks is super important, especially in medical content or any other kind of technical content, because the text can be extremely dense, and you need to understand what it is that you're saying, and especially with long sentences where there are lines and lines and lines and that's all one sentence, you have to really understand what part is referring back to what and make sense out of it for yourself so that you know what you're saying, because the human ear will pick up right away any inauthenticity, any confusion. Pronunciation, obviously, we know how truly important that is. Microphone technique, are you consistent with a microphone? Are your levels consistent? Is your energy consistent? If it's a long narration, do you have the same energy at the end that you had at the beginning? Are you aware of your popping your P's and your plosives and your sibilants and all these other technical factors? We also edit the audio. Typically we do just a clean edit to get rid of mouth noises and clicks and errant pops, background noises, any hums, but then oftentimes we'll deliver that unprocessed so that the audio engineer, the composer, the sound engineer can take that and then marry it properly with the music. And so you don't want to have it too built up and then have something else built up and then put it together. You want to deal with as much the raw material, clean audio. And then this last thing, recording scratch tracks is super important, especially for you guys, because early on, you need to know how long the script is, right? You need that scratch track to lay it out against the animatic. Oftentimes, you're probably doing the scratch yourselves. The sooner that script can get read and read out loud, the better. Because oftentimes, you'll think that you've got a 3-minute animation, but nobody had bothered to read the script, and when you read it out loud, it's 5 minutes, you know. That's a big problem. Medical text, of course, well, actually, we were gonna do our medical text read.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So,
That's a good time.
okay, yeah, right.
Crowd
So those,
participation.
right, those pieces of paper that I gave you, obviously with medical text, it's a lot more complicated. Oh, we didn't even do the, and then I left the room, right. The first one, and then I left the room. 6 simple words.
Can we have a volunteer? Somebody want to play?
Yeah, right. How do we say it? Is there only one way to say it, or are there 6 ways to say it? 6 ways to Sunday? Who would
Who
like
wants
to
to be
start?
brave?
Anybody? Oh, come on. There you go. There's a hand. Tell us your name, please.
Melissa Wallen.
Hi.
Hi, Melissa.
Hey, do I?
You can stay there. You don't have to.
Or,
Yeah. Yeah, you can sit. That's cool.
or stand. That's
Or stand.
standing.
Stand.
Stand. Sit.
Stand.
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 Jump around. Okay.
Jumping jacks. Yeah.
And then I left the room.
Perfect.
Okay, that's good interpretation. Thank you. Go ahead.
And then I left the room.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else?
And then I left the room.
Yes.
Huh? Okay. Kevin?
And
What-
then I left the room.
Uh-huh.
Are we trying to do that?
What about if you were scared? And then I left the room. Or
How about
upset,
if you, yeah, upset, right.
angry.
And then I left the room. Or if you set a trap for somebody, and then I left the room. You know, just myriad ways. Bashful, friendly, mischievous, wry. I mean, any number of ways. Now that's obviously just simple little, you know, these are words you probably, you know, scripts that we don't encounter in our work. So let's take a look at what we do. There's a few lines from the Acala, and obviously with this text it's going to be a little bit different. So who would like to try reading this in a, let's say, a caring tone? Any tone.
And then I left the room?
No, the next one, I mean,
next one.
the Acala. That we heard the other people saying, and the B-cell receptor signaling pathway.
I'll give it a
Go-
shot.
Go ahead, Kevin.
The B-cell receptor signaling pathway is essential for activation, proliferation, and survival of B cells. Bruton's tyrosine kinase, or BTK, has been shown to play a key role in the B-cell receptor signaling pathway, both in normal and malignant cells.
Okay. Somebody else want to try that with perhaps an authoritative tone? It's doctor to doctor, peer to peer, all right? You want to try it, Phil?
The B-cell receptor signaling pathway is essential for the activation, proliferation, and survival of B cells. Bruton's tyrosine kinase, or BTK, has been shown to play a key role in the B-cell receptor signaling pathway, both in normal and malignant cells.
Okay, thank you. Would somebody else like to try it with, like, this is really great news. This is a solution to somebody's problem, right? So I want to know that this is good news, right?
I'll try it. I don't know if it'll be like that.
Okay,
Thinking more
try it your way.
The B-cell receptor signaling pathway is essential for activation, proliferation, and survival of B cells. Bruton's tyrosine kinase, or BTK, has been shown to play a key role in the B-cell receptor signaling pathway, both in normal and malignant cells.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody. And that's the rumbling in the background that you have to be aware of when you're recording.
Yeah, exactly. Wasn't sure if it was more jets flying over.
Jets flying.
Yeah. So there's one little thing I wanted to talk about very quickly. It's both a musical term and a term that applies to speech, spoken word. It's called cadence. Anybody that was in middle school or high school band might have heard of the term cadence or the terms tonic, subdominant, and dominant. It's essentially, when spoken, it's oral punctuation marks. So if I'm telling you, how to do something, and I stop right here. Did it feel done? It didn't feel done. So that's my dominant. I'm hanging off on that dominant. And Debbie kind of alluded to before, with some people when they talk, they kind of stay monotone and drop right here. And then come over to this spot and then drop right here. And then the same thing, but right here. And so if you're not properly utilizing cadence, tonic, subdominant, dominant, you're not adequately building tension and then releasing that tension. So when you've got something to say that's really, really important, you can build it to about right here, and then you've made your point. And then, you know, it's, so that's my So the roles and responsibilities of a sound professional extend beyond just composing original scores. So as we talked about with the example before, sound design. Sound design can be utilized, obviously, as in the Account project, to blend unlike sounds to visuals and fill in some of those gaps. It can also be using things like Foley. I was telling some of you guys before about an interesting project that I did where I was combining a zipper sound. I dropped a wet sponge on a tile and something else to create like a little for something that was connecting together, and just little Foley type sound effects.
Or the dinosaur, right?
Oh yeah, the
right.
dinosaur from the paleontology commercial, or the presentation on Friday.
Thunderous, right?
The thunderous, yeah. So when he was walking, the boom, 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 boom. Sound design, all those kinds of things bring those elements to life, you know, and breathe life into it that it wouldn't have experienced otherwise. Editing project audio, editing the music itself, and then editing the voiceover on its own, and then marrying those two things together. You made a great point with that. It was either the first one or the second one where the mix is horrible, you know, and that pulls so much focus. When it's properly edited and properly mixed, mastered, and produced on the back end, it makes everything sound really good. It makes it sound like it's all coming from the same source, like it's in the same room. And when it's synced properly to the visuals, then you've got your nice full multimedia package that hits people right in the feels. And then not bro code, but pro code. So, and this, you know, the slide here demonstrates that, you know, all of the elements of your projects should be pro quality. They should be top shelf. You guys spent, you know, you've got all of your talents, your education, you've spent countless hours working on your projects, and then your clients spent countless dollars investing in these projects. To not have professional quality voice, to not have professional quality music, does a disservice to your projects otherwise.
So now you know the rules. It's time to bend them or break them, right? You're supremely confident, you have tremendous credentials, and that allows you to have a certain creative freedom if you allow yourself to go there. Professionals are able to take risks that, you know, people who are less familiar with what the fundamentals are feel like they can take. So James has some comments on that.
That's the client I want. I want somebody who's looking to do something different, and someone who's willing to take a risk. And just by virtue of the fact that it is a risk means that, you know, it may be beautiful in the end, or it may fall short. But that's all part of, you know, risk taking. And what I can say about those kinds of projects is that they help me grow as an artist. And if I'm doing the same thing over and over every day, or if I'm reproducing the same look every day, after a while, I'm going to get burned out and I'm going to walk away from it. But if I'm challenged to create something new and different, then that keeps me going.
Yeah, I mean, as an artist, as a creative type, there's nothing worse than being driven into a box, an assembly line, using cookie cutter techniques over and over again without ever really stepping out and trying something new. And on this next project, James will talk a little bit about a challenge
when the art
presented with.
Creative director came to me. He said, "We want something that looks like, you know, Tim Burton created it, like Tim Burton-esque." And I'd never been asked that before. You know, usually these MOAs or MODs have a very sort of unified look about them. They're all brightly lit, brightly colored, but they were looking for something very dark, and that was a first. And it was a great challenge, and to me, that's what really made it exciting. This to be asked and trusted to do something new and different, and to push the envelope artistically. It was a great project.
we're going to show you a clip from the project. This is what we're calling hairy cell leukemia meets Tim Burton. We're killing the lights for this. You'll see why.
Hairy cell leukemia, or HCL, is a rare indolent B-cell malignancy that accounts for about 2% of all mature non-Hodgkin lymphoid neoplasm subtypes. The name hairy cell comes from the distinctive morphology of the disease. Mature B cells that become malignant hairy cells exhibit ample cytoplasm characterized by thin, hair-like protrusions. The pathogenesis of HCL remains an enigmatic story.
So Russ scored that piece, and I started out as the voice-over artist on it, but then Ogilvy realized that I had voiced something for the competition, so wisely they decided not to use my voice, because it was like the example of, you know, using the same piece of music and it really looks bad on you if you're using the same thing that your competition is. So I switched roles, which I sometimes do. I became the casting director and got auditions from men and women that were fitting the specs of what we were trying to achieve there. And I also became the music supervisor on the project, which, yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. A little more from James.
You see really the same environment, the same shot in hairy cell leukemia over and over and over. It's like, how do you make that exciting the fifth or sixth time the audience has seen it, you know? But that's the job, you know, that's what you're tasked to do sometimes. And maybe someday we can have a talk about script writing and writing scripts specifically for animation, because I think there's a lot to be learned there.
So he's suggesting that animators struggle with scripts sometimes. Voice actors struggle with scripts as well. He asked me the other day, have you ever had an unreadable script? Well, you know, never say never, but you know, sometimes they can be very challenging, because there are two different kinds of writing, more than two obviously, but there's writing for reading and there's writing for speaking. And most of the time, the writers are writing for reading. And, you know, words like therein, therefore, you know, hereto, you know, these are not words that we use in colloquial speech. So oftentimes, you know, the request is to have a voiceover that sounds natural. You want something that's pleasing to the ear, but it's not written that way. So the sooner you get a pro in reading that script, A, you're going to find out that it was, you know, too long. That was definitely the case with the hairy cell. They wanted a 5-minute video. It was 7 minutes of script, and then they had to keep cutting it down and down and down, and ultimately it was really quite sad. But the voice actor, she had to speed up her read, and it sort of defeated the purpose of what we were trying to do, which was have this really slow, kind of dark pace. But you know, at the end of the day, there was nothing we could do, because that's what the client wanted. They were not willing to cut the script anymore. So, you know, that was what we did. So the other thing I want to, two other things I want to point out about scripts is, Russ was talking about oral punctuation. There's script punctuation as well. So, you know, when you're writing, you write, you follow rules of grammar. But when you're reading that script as a voice artist, you're not necessarily following those same rules. Just because you see a comma doesn't mean that you're supposed to stop and pause there. You know, just because there's a period doesn't necessarily mean that's where you should stop. If you just think about language, how I'm talking now, you know, you oftentimes want to throw those conventions out the window in the service of sounding natural. Ellipses are on your storyboards. What does that mean? Does that mean that, you know, that we're pausing a long time? You know, so one thing that you can do that's very helpful for talent is to have a little key at the bottom of your script, and a shout out to Cognition, which who they do this on their scripts, so that if it's bold, it means give it a little more juice, a little more highlighting. If it's italicized, it means this. If it's, you know, 3 ellipses, it means, you know, a 1 second pause, you know, whatever it is, so that you can communicate that this is what you want to hear. because otherwise these symbols, they mean something. I remember Perkins last year or the year before was talking about symbols and the significance of them, and the same thing is true with, with punctuation. The last point that's really important about scripts is localization. So oftentimes once a project is done, they want to convert it into another language, show it in Mexico, in Latin America. When you convert English to Spanish, just as an example, your script is going to be 30% longer. So you've created this beautiful video that's 3 minutes. Now you want you want a Spanish version. You send out the script to the translator, comes back, and then now it's a 4-minute read. How do you fit that into your 3-minute animation? So these are really important things to think about early on, and why, when you think about them, that makes you a Pro 2.0. So in being a Pro 2.0, we're suggesting that you stretch beyond your expertise into some of these other areas that are going to really support the visuals and make them be the best that they can be. Because when all these components, the sound, the voice, the visuals, are thoughtfully and collectively constructed, then the impact is just that much better. And you're really taking care of your clients by bringing this up, by starting the conversation, by showing that you have their backs, because you know what's going to make the project the best project that it can be. Possibly they're going to get to the conversation of voice, of music. Oftentimes it's the last thing that companies think about, but it shouldn't be. It should be right up there at the top. And you can lead that charge. They can tell you no, but at least they know and you know that you're doing the best, bringing the most to the project for it to really shine.
For the medical illustrator who's dabbling in animation, or maybe that's your main focus right now, I think if you're like me, you're going to come to the realization that it is a multidisciplinary endeavor, that it takes more than just some well-crafted visuals, which as medical illustrators we're all really good at. We can create visuals, but the question then becomes, well, can you create a score? Can you do the voiceover? And I think if you're looking to do a real professional job, then you have to come to terms with your limitations. And so it may require that you reach out to some real professionals for the other aspects of your project. So obviously if you're creating animation, this is something very akin to like film. You're creating a movie, and all movies have scores, all movies have voice. So if that's your game, then by all means you need to find the right people.
Right, so it's an opportunity for you to be valuable in new ways.
Big time. Yeah, I was just saying, when you are able to come to the table immediately and say, hey, I suggest these things, and I know a guy or a gal who can do these sorts of things, we can give a full multimedia experience instead of just like, hey, I can do your visuals. That's...
When you have that first client call and they tell you they want an animation, the first thing out of your mouth can be, well, what about the score? What about the voice? Hey, I've got some people I'd like to recommend. I have some people who I have a great rapport with, or, who I've worked with on past projects. And so, like right out of the starting gate, that can be part of the discussion. And frankly, it should be part of the discussion, because it's just as much part of the artistic direction as the visual. I mean, they all go hand in hand, and they all have to be crafted in such a way that they complement one another.
So, the way you get there is by building your crew. It's what will make you stand out from your competition, because you're bringing more to the table, more to the conversation. You'll be making your clients' lives easier. You'll be bringing up topics that maybe they weren't thinking of bringing out, and you'll become a trusted advisor. So these are ways for you to be not just a pro, but a Pro 2.0. Crew code. You don't just want to bring anybody. into the picture, right? Their work is going to be a reflection on you. So you really want to vet these people. You want to make sure that they're an asset to the team. Just because somebody is talented doesn't mean that they're going to be an asset to your team. You want to know that they're top shelf pros. You want to know that they're responsive, responsible. You want to know that that they're professional in how they comport themselves, both in writing, via email, and also on the phone, and even in a session. Because I've been in sessions where the talent, you know, they swear, and I mean, I swear, but I don't do it when I'm on the job. You know, I just don't think that that's, you know, professional. So, you know, these are just important things to consider. And as you're coming across people who you know, who do these other things, take note. You know, how are they striking you? Do they seem like good people? Are they friendly? Do they have a good reputation? Are they, you know, just it's just the point is just to be aware and to make note, so that, you know, you can begin to build that team, not when you need it, but so that it's there when you need it, but take the time to build it, so that you know, so that you're building those resources.
Absolutely. Creative thinking requires creative approaches. Okay, so as a songwriter, sometimes I have songwriting students and they'll ask me, so do you start with the lyrics first? Do you start with chords or a melody or what? And my answer is always yes. And by that I mean, like, I try different ways to do each of these things. And there's no right or wrong way, no better or worse way, but each way allows me to be creative in different ways and it inspires me in different ways. And so we got to actually work on a project where we did a little bit of that. James and I were talking one day about exactly that. And I asked him, I was like, well, James, have you ever have you ever created an animation to like a built score or to voiceover anything? He's like, he kind of turned, he was like, no, but that sounds awesome. And around that same time, he was like, you know, I was just reading a Grimm's Fairy Tales version of Snow White to my son, who's also my music student. And he was like, I think it would be cool to like bring that to life. And so we talked about it, and we cranked out a script and sent it to Debbie, and she did this awesome read, to which I scored some interesting music, and James is currently working on an animation for it. It's in progress right now. We've got some storyboards that we're going to show you guys, but it's pretty fun. Check it out.
Her lips blood red, her hair like night, her skin like snow, her name Snow White.
So that's a little teaser for that. Obviously, we don't have an animatic yet, or you know, but that's the direction that we're going, and it really was a fun, you know, it's been a fun process. And as a voice actor, I love to know if music has already been selected for the project, because music inspires me. It tells me what the mood and the tone is. But composers like to know who the voice is, because the voice is an instrument. In fact, there was a project I'd worked on, and we had a different composer, and he had already started scoring the piece for the animation. And partway through, the client decided that they wanted a man. Okay. So, you know, I changed my hats. Now I become casting director, and I find, you know, the perfect guy that they want. But the composer, he couldn't use the exact same score, because he was going from having an alto instrument to having this deep baritone instrument. So he kind of had to go back to not exactly square one. He used a lot of the same elements, but he absolutely had to change it. So, you know, that's a little bit of 50-50 which way. You know, sometimes I get to hear music beforehand. Sometimes I'm the inspiration for the, you know,
the chicken or the egg paradigm.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, you know, what we're trying to communicate here is that there can be a magic, you know, when you have a collective, when you're working with other creatives, and you know, by using this sort of nonlinear thinking, what you end up with is new ideation, and that's really exciting for everybody. So again, you know, think outside your realm, and even go beyond just thinking about it. If you know of a project or one of your colleagues where they're already, in midst of working with a voice artist, ask if you can sit in on the session. Ask if you can listen in, or if you can go. It can be really interesting to watch a voice actor work. Ask if you can sit in with the composers for the mix, because I'm never going to become an expert at what he does, but I expose myself so that I can understand the gestalt better. In fact, that's what brought me into the AMI in the first place, because I do so much medical narration that I felt it was important for me to understand that other piece. We're all actors on the same stage. We don't all appear at the same time. First there's the writer, and then there's the illustrator, blah, 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 blah. But the more we mix it up, the more creative energy happens, and it's just more fun.
I absolutely encourage you guys, if you're ever working with voice talent or composers, to ask questions, to sit in on the creative process, the recording process, and all that. We've done a bunch of projects together where we've called in, like I think on one of the projects we've shown, there's probably 6 of us on the call while Debbie was directing the voice talent to do the voice, and James chimed in, and I think somebody maybe from one of the creative teams chimed in, and all that meant that everybody kind of had the say, and we all knew kind of what was going on, and we could say a little more of this, a little less of this, try this instead of that, take a beat here or whatever. And same thing with the mix. Like if you guys ever have questions about this, I really want this piece to be maybe a little louder, a little softer, a little less scary here, this, that, whatever. It's awesome because that way, when everybody's on the same page, then you can really get everything firing on all cylinders, I guess, so to speak.
And everybody isn't always on the same page.
That's a
somebody
fact.
Else, right? So, of course, we all are aiming for the same goal, right? To create something really special. So we want to encourage you to experiment with your work, to refresh your page, your page being yourself and your perspectives on yourself, and reach out to others. And the good way to remember that is err. And after all, to err is human, is it not? Tons of online resources, both music and voiceover, a ridiculous number, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and on each of these sites, there can be tens of thousands of choices. It's daunting, needless to say. So what's the takeaway? Start by taking advantage of the resources that are near you, of the people who you know, maybe in your own shop, or maybe your colleagues at another firm. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Even of us, I had somebody who, was like, I'm not sure if I should ask you. Ask it, there's no commitment by simply having a conversation. Russell?
Yeah, I think, if you can find the creative ways to get all of these things happening at once, it takes your visuals from becoming just a presentation to a full multimedia experience, and something that taps into that emotional psyche that will really hit people in the feels and be the best vehicle to deliver your message, whatever that might be.
So we'll let James bring this home, right?
There are a couple of salient points here, and it's really simple. First of all, use professional voice talent. It's that simple. Secondly, look to professional musicians for scoring your work. And I think having this information from today's talk is going to enable you to make the right decision. And I think the next step for you there in the audience is to educate your clients and let them know the importance of using professional talent. And that way they can budget, for these other professionals, these other people to come in and really elevate the project as a whole. And I think if you do that, in the end, you're going to have a piece that is so well crafted that it's going to better target your audience. It's going to deliver the message, the communication points that you want to make. And once you have everybody, all these professionals in the same room who know their craft and understand the curriculum goals, the learning objectives, and then they understand the mission of the piece, it's really a no-brainer. You can't help but make a great product at that point. So Those 2 points, professional voice talent and professional musicians for score. If you can do that, if you can add that to your project, to your already stunning visuals, you're going to succeed.
So thanks for joining us today. Don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help you find whatever it is you're looking for, or to answer your questions. So
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, by the way, we're happy to answer. Yeah, please.
Do you have time for questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's say we have a decent sized project for animation, I don't know, a 3-minute animation or something, 30, 40, 50K of working on the artwork for it. I know that we can't do price fixing kind of conversations, but if we're thinking in terms of having a conversation with our client, what kind of percentage, broad strokes percentage, should we add on, thinking in terms of sound effects or customized score or voiceover talent with reading a script for a 3-minute kind of thing? Should we think in terms of 10%, 20%? Can you even answer that, or is that how long is a piece of string, depending upon how difficult the project is?
Yeah, and also the usage is really important too. To know how where and how that piece is going to be used, and is it a pharma piece, or is it an internal piece? Is it something for a hospital, or James would probably be a good person to ask that question of, and I'd be happy to get back to you so that you have some sort of barometer of what he uses, because I think he probably does use a kind of percentage approach in figuring out his budgets. He has, in terms of me, we have conversations. Sometimes the conversation goes, well, what is your budget? Sometimes you already know, he knows what it is that he's been given, and out of that totality, he's able to allocate a certain amount for voice and a certain amount for music. So it's hard to throw out any one specific number.
On that note, do you both build in your fees associated with what rights you're selling to us as the producers of the animation?
Yes.
Or are we actually buying your voice, like our copyright and licensing of our product? How do you take that into account?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it's a long conversation, especially where voice artists are concerned, because there's so much non-union work that happens now, and everybody's asking for a buyout, and it's very difficult to say, look, I'm gonna, these are the terms. Sometimes people are willing to talk terms, and other times people don't even know what you're talking about when you say, what's the usage? Especially people of our generation know these things from the union, and are there residuals, or what's the cycle going to be of the usage of it? And nowadays, because of the disintermediation, now people who are seeking talent can go directly to the talent. They don't need an agent anymore. They don't need a casting director anymore. And the younger generation, they don't know that terminology from before. So now it's like, well, this is what I have. Do you want it? Take it or not. And because of the competition, there are a lot of people who will, you'll always be able to find somebody to do it for less. But that, that's not really a direct answer to your question. But
maybe we should assume buyout fees that are high enough to do buyouts.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. And the other thing, just to tell you, sort of from my perspective too, if it's not going to be an important distinction is it going to be broadcast or not broadcast? Because if it's not going to be broadcast, then then it commands less money if it's not going out to the world. Although internet usage is sort of the wild, wild west now in terms of like, where is it playing? Is it pre-roll? Is it not pre-roll? Is it, and there's no hard and fast rule across the board. But you're smart to ask the question, and the point I was going to make too is that a lot of this content changes, the science gets updated, and so even though I may be concerned about giving you the rights to use my voice on that project forever, because perpetuity is like the dreaded term for any artist, right? To give your work away in perpetuity. But the reality is the science is going to change, you know. They're going to want to update, you know, the visuals or whatever. They realize that the script needs tweaking, and so, you know, is it really living in perpetuity? Not so much. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis, which makes it typically, I guess, a little bit difficult to answer the question with broad strokes. But yeah, I mean, I've worked on projects that have been works for hire. I've worked on projects that have been, you know, a 6-month, 1 year, like it's had a limited, you know, run contract situation, and you know, it's a little, it's kind of all over the place. To answer your question even less directly.
Yeah.
As a new graduate who did medical animation, I don't know very much about all of this, so how would you recommend approaching a professional voice actress or musician? And also, how would you, like, are there any specific resources for finding them? Because, like you mentioned, there's a lot, and when you Google it, it's kind of overwhelming. So if you have any tips on that, it would be helpful.
Well, I would be happy to help you directly. If you tell me what your project is and who the audience is, what kind of, you know, who you're speaking to, because who you're speaking to is going to have an impact on who they want to hear it from, you know. So depending on that, then we can look at all different kinds of variables. I mean, you say you want male or female, do you want young or old? Then you can get more specific. Do you want hip? Do you want, you know, sophisticated? Do you want accented or not? Do you want a Spanish accent? Do you want a British accent? You know, there are just so many variations. And then, you know, as an artist, what I do for my clients starting out, especially, I've done a lot of work with the graduate students at UIC and at Toronto for their master's research projects. And what I do to try to help educate them is, and I do it for anybody where we're starting out really, is to give them a couple of sound samples. I could do it this way, and I could do it this way, based on my own feeling or interpretation of what I think would make sense. But that's just me. You know, the beauty, what I love about my job is the creative magic that happens with other people, because I take direction really well. And I love to have somebody tell me, oh, try this, or have you thought about that, or a vocal reference, right? If you know there's a famous person. So a vocal reference or a music reference is a fantastic marker to start with. We want something that sounds like this. It's a good guidepost. Is that helpful?
As far as musicians, you know, if you have friends or connections to the industry, that always helps. Leaning on people, the connections that you already have in-house is a great resource. Otherwise, try to find, like, if you've seen a project, if you hear music, you're like, oh, that's amazing, try to get in touch with whoever produced the project. I'm sure they'd be happy to say such and such person or firm or production company did the audio, and then you can touch base with them directly. Because, yeah, I mean, just like Debbie, like, I have countless people that if I can't work on something or I can't do something, I have 15 people I can call in 20 minutes, and if they couldn't do it, then they can pass it along. So it's a lot of these kinds of things are word of mouth endeavors, you know, and it's tough because it's, especially in this, because literally 3 years ago I didn't know that medical animation was a thing. I didn't know the AMI existed. You know what I mean? And so as I've been talking to people after launching Canary Red, they're like, wait, what do you do again? You know, what is this place? You know, and so some of these places or some of these people and these, you know, and these groups can be a little bit more difficult to find in that regard. But like I said, if you've got people that you know that are connected to it, or you've seen some things that are like, that's awesome, I want that.
People here, or in the gallery with the animations, you know, that were shown, you know, sit there and listen, and which ones, you know, speak to you, which ones catch your ear in a positive way. So this gets back to sort of the building your crew. I have lots of crews. I have, you know, composer crews, I have animator crews, I'm even a member of something called SWINEY, Science Writers in New York. You know, to network with those people, I'm voicing the words that they're writing, so I want to know them. I would think that they would want to know me too. When it comes to voices, I know that my voice is not the perfect voice for everything, far from it, but I have a vast and deep network of pro colleagues that I recommend, that I feel confident and I know, you know, are going to do me solid, you know. You had a question.
Yeah. you guys both seem very invested in having the content like all go together all the way throughout the different layers. What would you say from an audio point of view to a client that is insisting on a mismatch? Like we have a script and they want to put text in places where it doesn't go.
Can you because I
Like
almost think I
on-screen
know what you're
text.
asking, but yeah. So
on-screen text that doesn't go with what's
that's
being
not like
voiced.
rhythmically in line with the Okay,
Yeah,
so like
it might be like a similar sentiment in a different phrasing, or
that would
too
be
much
another.
data
That would be
doesn't
one of
match.
those times that I would say sitting in on a mix session, sitting in on an editing session to say this right here doesn't work. Let's make this faster or slower. These things line up. I don't want it to. So let's, you know what I mean? Like I think that's when that would be valuable to be like in the room or metaphysics or I don't know whatever.
I think if I understand your question is you're saying how do you convince your client that it's not working?
Well, it's like in the planning phase. It's even before that. How do you like emotionally convince them that it's not going to work? Like, can we line this up better? Can
Okay.
Can we see what they're hearing all the way through? Because that's very important to the story. And they're like, yeah, I get it. But like, I want to see this here and say this other thing at the same time.
Yeah, I guess it's.
Well, I think there's science behind, what can we focus on, at once. We can't, read and listen to something else at the same time. It's not possible. And that's where you want harmony between these elements so that you stay engaged. Otherwise, if you're watching something and the lips are moving to a different pace as the voice is coming out, you lost interest right away. You're disconnected. People will suffer through crappy video much longer, bless you, than they will with bad audio. People disengage right away if the audio is bad, if they can't hear it, if it's crackly, if it's, if there's noises in the background, if it sounds like they're in an echo chamber, or if you can't quite understand them because the rhythm mumbles. It's, there are just so many factors that can make the audio really lousy, and that's just an immediate out for listeners.
Unless, of course, you're watching Bruce Lee movies and you've got the. Yes, because
It's not the case.
So I mean, because it kind of goes back to that point, like where if they're not lining up together, you're going to have that disconnect, and if you're trying to present the information, you're going to be thinking about how it doesn't line up instead of listening to what's being said or whatever.
As a suggestion, sometimes, no judgment here, because I know I'm this way too at times. I need to see something or hear it in order to understand it. So if that's the case, then if you did a sample the way they want it and a sample the way you think it should be, so that then, because maybe they can't imagine how it's going to be until they see it / hear it.
That's
right?
what I was going to. Doing an A/B, like this, your way, the good way, I think is going to be paramount at that point, because it should be effortless. You shouldn't have to try to understand. It should just be boom, reduce all of the noise.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe you want to ask the QBQ, the question behind the question, which is, what is it that you're trying to achieve here?
Sure.
Maybe there's something that they're trying to get at, that once you understand what their goal or their task or the problem is, you'll be able to figure out the solution better.
And that's kind of what I was going to say when you first asked me the question, is if you're trying to create imbalance, there are ways to do that using certain sounds. Like whether, like on some of the hairy cell leukemia and then the Snow White thing, like there's a lot of disjointed like sounds that kind of hit you in weird feels. But yeah, you're talking about like, see this thing, but say this thing over here, and then to
They
me,
just want to tell everything about the
yeah.
product.
I think there's better ways to achieve that. That would be my opinion, but what do I know?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I wrote down
For sure.
some
Awesome.
keywords and.
Other questions? I know we saw a couple of these. Yes, ma'am.
I'll do this kind of question. If you're going to use an original score, at what point do you score? Do you take like an animation with some scratch audio and score to that? Because as an animator, I've animated to music.
For
so
sure.
I want the music first.
Oh,
so what comes first?
That's a great question. And so on most of the projects I've worked on, they send me an animatic, just like a very, like bare bones kind of visual with certain James sent some really crude, like little tomato-sized, just And so he'd say, during this frame, this is going to happen, and in 8 seconds, this is going to go from here to here, or whatever. So then I've got an idea of what's happening, and I can kind of pre-score it and have like a sample to say, hey, what do you think of this? And we can kind of go back and forth like that. And then as he builds the animation, or as you build the animation, you can kind of stay in contact and go back and forth. And what's crazy is the first few projects that James and I worked on, having worked on similar projects before, there was a lot of back and forth. And a lot of people like, this doesn't work, but luckily for those kinds of things, and I think it was because of the animatic, the first 3 projects we worked on together, I gave him my first sample. He's like, it's perfect, they loved it, we're done. And I was like, whoa. And I owed the credit to having this raw visuals to be able to say, this is what's happening, this is what they want, this is how it should sound, and then go from there.
And even before that, to have a creative call with all the players, right? Right? With a voice artist. With the composer.
From my seat, anytime I get a call about scoring an animation, I always ask, like, everything that she just said, but like, okay, what's the purpose? What's the tone? I try to get as many adjectives from you or from the client as possible to kind of give me as much direction as possible. Which again, I go back to saying, being on that creative call or being in the room for the scoring process or the mixing process to say, this is working, this isn't working, I want more of this or less of this. Then, you know what I mean? Then your voice is heard, their voice is heard, and it's easy to kind of get everybody on the same page. Yeah, for sure. Question?
Yeah?
This is just pure curiosity. You've made it pretty clear that your audience is the first thing you take into consideration when you start a project, or one of the first things. What was the audience on the Tim Burton hairy lymphoma?
Yeah, the hairy cell leukemia.
The hairy cell leukemia.
So,
what was the audience?
I was going to say, I don't remember. As best the creative director from the firm who contacted James said that they wanted something just different, and they wanted to go outlandish on a limb and do.
So it wasn't doctor to doctor. It was general public.
I think it was general public. I'm not 100%. That would be a James question, and we we could absolutely follow up because that's a great question for sure.
Yeah, right. It's a good question. I don't remember whether it was
for sure.
Whether it was the MOD was for the public or not. But I'm happy to answer. Get the answer.
Yeah.
It's curiosity. Thank you.
And there are many people to serve. Actually, it's not just when you're looking at a script. Yes, it's the audience, but you also want to serve, the content writer. You also want to serve the facts and the story. So there are lots of players that you have to that you want to think about and try and please. And we're being told we have to
I
go.
believe that's our time.
Yeah,
If you guys
thank
have
you very
any more
much.
questions, find us the rest of the weekend. And thanks so much for having us, you guys. Appreciate it.